for our keynote this afternoon. So I'll be introducing her and I'll be following and organizing the question afterwards. Dr. Leoussi is Associate Professor in European History. She's founder of ASEN and founding editor of Nations and Nationalism, as you obviously know. She has published extensively on, among other themes, the representation of national identity in art, race, anti-Semitism, and national identity in 19th century Europe, the role of the classical tradition in the making of modern nationalities, and many other themes. Among her many publications, we single out one, the Encyclopedia of Nationalism. Also, in 2015, she curated the British Museum exhibition, Defining Beauty, the Body of Ancient Greek Art. Today, she will be talking about art and national modernization. Leoussi,
and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here with you and in this beautiful city of Antwerp. I was supposed to talk about two different titles which appear on the website, and I may have written two papers, so you can stop me at any point for too long. So art and national modernization. In 1955, the German-British art historian Sir Nicholas Pelsner delivered the distinguished BBC Radio 4 Reed lecture entitled The Englishness of English Art. As a German Jew who was forced in 1933 to flee Germany and to find refuge in England, he tried as an outsider to understand the distinctive cultural orientations of the English people. He tried to understand their ideas and their values. In his 7 Reed lectures, Pelsner set out to show how these English ideas and attitudes to the world were expressed in the kind of art that was made in England and could account for its distinctiveness, its Englishness. For Pelsner, the work of 4 English artists embodied what he called the genius loci, the spirit of the place. John Constable, William Blake, Joshua Reynolds, and William Hogarth. The spirit consisted of a number of principles. Constable embodied the English pursuit of nature. Constable's art was the art that had defined the English countryside, its distinctive landscapes, its skies, and its clouds. Hogarth embodied English empiricism, or the observation of life as it really is, without idealization or imposition of theory on persons or nature. Hogarth expressed these characteristics in his self-portrait, in which he painted himself as he really was, warts and all, wearing informal clothes and wearing a cap instead of the fashionable wig. The self-portrait is also a manifesto of English recognition of the irregularities of nature as a serpentine line. The serpentine line, which you see here on his palette, was the opposite of the straight line rationalism of continental thought that was most evident, was commonly evident in the gardens of the Palais de Versailles, which are very different from the gardens of Buckingham Palace, which are full of mystery and surprises. They're natural gardens. Other English characteristics included detachment, love of liberty, and tendency to compromise. The list is long, and in its turn raises another problem, the problem of defining human cultures. This is a problem which deserves greater attention than it has received as a central problem in nationalism studies. This is a problem to which Anthony Smith, Duke Leoussi, John Hutchinson have made great contributions with concepts such as the golden age, the cultural entrepreneur, the cultivation of culture. Now, there is no doubt that culture influences art. In his lectures, Pevsner emphasized precisely this link, the link between art and its cultural context. As a human creation, a product of the human mind, a cosa mentale, as the Renaissance artists called it, art is the result of reflection and calculation, both individual and collective. As such, it is a documented medium of expression of human thought, just like language. Art communicates our visions of the world through its power to externalize our visions in images. This is what Sir Ernest Gombrich called that witchery of art to make the absolute present. Art has the ability to create the illusion of the presence of things. By representing ideas and persons, art shares the fate of these ideas and persons when people rebel against them. So art speaks, and it matters. Now, artists are not just products of the cultural environment. Artists have also actively set out to shape their cultural environment. Thank you. Lenny disappeared completely.
Hey.
In the process, the artists have also actively set out to shape their cultural environment in a process which Duke Leoussi, as I said, has aptly described as the cultivation of culture. This process has included the cultivation of the culture of the nation. From the late 18th century onwards, artists across Europe engaged with the idea of the nation as it became the charismatic object of two new ideologies, two new visions of the world, the Enlightenment and Romanticism. Both the Enlightenment and Romanticism saw in the nation the embodiment of a modern and better world. However, they defined the modern world of nations in very different ways. They defined it in terms of the city of Athens and in terms of the village. I'm showing you here paintings by Flemish artists who were born, Flemish Dutch artists, born in Breda but worked in Antwerp. Spent most of his life in Antwerp. Now, the paradox of the modern world is that neither the Enlightenment nor Romanticism, that generated it, that is the modern world, proposed entirely new worlds. Both the Enlightenment and Romanticism looked to the past the golden ages. They both set out to revive these golden ages, and in so doing, they created the modern age. However, the Enlightenment and Romanticism set out to revive elements from two very different traditions or patterns of life in common. One was political and the other cultural. The Enlightenment set out to revive the classical tradition, and specifically the ancient, people-governed free cities of Athens and Republican Rome. Romanticism set out to revive, by contrast, Romanticism set out to revive and continue cultural tradition, and specifically the diverse traditions of rural communities. In both cases, the model communities, the city and the village, were referred to as nations. The French Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen of August 1789, the Manifesto that is of the Enlightenment, affirmed in Article 3 that, I quote, the source of all sovereignty resides essentially in the nation. While Herder, Johann Gottfried von Herder, the champion of cultural communities, who also coined the term nationalismus, would ask, has a nation anything more precious than the language of its fathers? In the language of its fathers dwells its entire world of tradition, history, religion, principles of existence, its whole heart and soul. Both ideologies, the Enlightenment and Romanticism, sought legal political transformation. The Enlightenment demanded democracy, Romanticism demanded the nation state. At first, the relationship between the Enlightenment and Romanticism was antagonistic. Romanticism was a reaction against the Enlightenment. It was, as Nietzsche and Isaiah Berlin said, the counter-Enlightenment. By the middle of the 19th century, the two would become intertwined in popular demands for both liberty and identity, or, to use Ernest Geller's terms, for both reason and culture. These demands came together in the Annus Mirabilis of 1848, the springtime of nations. They were the twin goals and battle cries of the European revolution which swept across Europe. These revolutions provided the pattern for subsequent revolutions for democracy, identity, and resistance to foreign rule that would include the Velvet Revolutions of 1989, the Ukrainian Orange Revolution of 2004, the Arab Spring of 2010, 11, and others. Artists from both camps took it upon themselves to create images that would define and amplify, oppose, or reconcile the new hopes for a better world. I shall show you the kinds of images that artists created to make their publics see what a world of nations would look like and how it could be achieved. In their attempt to define the nation, artists also defined the contours of modern art. So if all written documents of the 19th and 20th centuries were to disappear, and only the works of European artists had survived, the history of European nationalism would not be lost. Let us now first look at how artists defined the Enlightenment vision of the nation. The message of the Enlightenment was communicated primarily through its classical models. Neoclassicism was the art of the Enlightenment, and Jacques David its messenger. David was a major artist and a very important political personality. He was a supporter of the revolution, one of the deputies of the Revolutionary Assembly, and would die in exile in Brussels because he had voted for the execution of Louis XVI. Eugène Delacroix described David as the father of the whole modern school. For David, Socrates and Brutus would carry the message of the nation as a community of citizens. Socrates and Brutus were symbols of democracy and free thought. So you hear Socrates by David. Socrates had criticized rationally and empirically Athenian belief in the 12 gods. But at the same time, he would accept his condemnation to death by the polis for not observing the laws which protected religious traditions. Brutus is another painting, this is a sketch for a painting by David, in which David shows Brutus, who was Brutus, not the Brutus who killed Caesar, but the Brutus who was the first consul and founder of the Roman Republic. So in Brutus, David would show the new Enlightenment scale of values, the protection of political freedom from royal and tyrannical usurpers, as being superior to the protection of the family. And you can see here the city of Rome, Via Roma, Rome, the city, the free city of Rome, raised to a goddess, Dea Roma. And Brutus would order the execution of his sons because they were trying to bring the monarchy back to Rome. And he would see the city of Rome as being priority, his values, to killing, having his sons killed. And you see on the left and the right, his wife and daughters devastated by the lictors bringing the dead bodies of the sons. And then you see Pericles, painted by a German artist, Philip Foltz. Pericles is revived in the 19th century. He's the champion of the liberals, especially John Stuart Mill of Europe, as the great champion of democracy. And someone who will bring the golden age of Athens with its philosophers and artists. Romanticism inspired an entirely different kind of art in both subject matter and style. The Enlightenment sought to revive Athens of the 5th century BC, which it saw as the city of reason, a community of free thinkers. For the Enlightenment, human beings, in order to become rational again, should have no navel, as Ernest Gellner said. They should free themselves from the superstitions, obligations, and attachments that tradition, that is the ideas and values of ancestors, had piled on them. Human beings should be cultureless. Reason would bring consensus and peace, for, according to Immanuel Kant, the autonomous will is the good will. So this is the rational view of man, the basis of the nation, and then you have the romantic vision of the nation. Because Romanticism reacted against this vision of cultureless free thinkers without memories, feelings, or obligations. And it did defend tradition. Hegel defended tradition, and for Hegel, the inherited wisdom of the ages was stored in native languages and literatures. As Hegel put it, from a study of native literature, we learn how a people thought, what it wished and craved for, how it took its pleasures, how it was led by speeches or its inclinations. Hegel's romantic cultural nationalism was a plea against political empire. The imposition by force, that is, the imposition by force of one culture on another. For Hegel, the Roman Empire, the archetypal empire, was an unnatural monster. A lion's head with a dragon's tail, an eagle's wing, a bear's paw, glued together in one unpatriotic symbol of the state, because Rome incorporated all its the culture that it subjugated into this monster, but also transformed and distorted them. Hegel favored the proliferation of self-governing national republics. The invasion of Germany by Napoleon's Grande Armée rapidly transformed Hegel's cultural nationalism into political nationalism. The principle of political nationalism was very simple. It was a demand, as Gellner put it, and I'm going to be very sexist now, but I am not. Gellner said it. So the principle of political nationalism was that every girl ought to have a husband, preferably her own. So nationalism became the marriage between culture and state. The marriage created a new type of state, the nation state. And we are still grappling with the possibilities, the implications, and the consequences of the idea of the self-determined nation. The idea of the nation as a sovereign community of culture transformed both European art and the role of artists. It made them modern. The cultural idea of the nation produced the following changes in European art. all, it changed the academic hierarchy of artistic subject matter. The academic traditional hierarchy of subject matter put at the top history subjects, subjects taken from Greek and Roman history, biblical history, and Greek mythology. Second came portraiture of the great and good. Third came genre, images of everyday life. Fourth, landscape, and fifth, still life. So, under the impact of the national idea, you have the transformation in the hierarchy of artistic subject matter, which I'll show you. You have changes in the specific subjects on which art is focused. And third, the style of art changed. I shall now show you I shall show you some examples of these transformations. But I urge you to go to Professor Leoussi's Encyclopedia of Nationalism, which is an Aladdin scale of national art. And I think itself, it needs a PhD student to study it and look at the patterns that will emerge from this wonderful database. It's also an analysis, excellent analysis of artists and movements and art. So let us now look at transformations in history painting in the top category and sculpture. Now, Greek and Roman history and mythology are transformed, first of all, into national history and mythology, or traditional history painting is transformed into images of battles. So I'm showing you here on the right, you see Alfred the Great, painted by G.F. Watts for the Houses of Parliament in London in the 1840s. And here, Watts shows history painting and painting primarily to be of military subjects. He's showing history subjects, military subjects, as the wars of nations, how popular mobilization of one nation against another and in defense of one from the other. Whereas I'm showing on the left, you see Leonardo da Vinci's, Rubens' copy of Leonardo da Vinci's Battle of Anghiari, which is a battle for domination between Milan and Florence. It was a battle dominated by mercenary kings, by mercenary princes who wanted to extend the battle because the longer the battle, the more money they would get. So you have this, it emerges now the new type of military subject that emerges, popular mobilization in defense of the nation against foreign rule, against princes fighting with their armies. I show you here another history painting of the new type, of the national type. This is Constable Art, a Belgian artist, who paints here the Peasant War. He painted this in 1875, and he shows a popular national revolt that took place in 1798 against French occupation of the southern Netherlands, including modern Belgium, Luxembourg, and parts of Germany. Then, so this is the nationalization of history, the national wars. You see sculptors also showing national heroes emerge. People who had liberated the nation. And Arminius is a very popular subject in Germany, the liberator of Germania from Roman rule. Another example of this kind of painting is Mucha's painting, the whole cycle called the Slav epic, in which he shows the history of all the Slav peoples, of the Pan-Slavists. And see, this is the first painting that's made of this cycle of 10 paintings. The Slavs in the original homeland in southern Asia, who are pushed from their homeland to Turanians by Turkic peoples, and they're also subjugated on their way by Goths. And this first image prefigures the troubles and tribulations of the Slav people who will be liberated in the end in 1918 and acquire national independence. So this is history painting and how it is transformed from Greek and Roman and princely fights into national battles and national military heroes. Then Greek mythology switches into national mythology, and Rubens will become Axeli Kalenkalela, and Axeli Kalenkalela, a Finnish artist. He illustrates the very patriotic painting of this beautiful girl who is chased by this elderly man, and he offers her jewelry to follow him, and she doesn't want to. She rejects him because she wants to go back to her father and to her homeland. Now, what is interesting is the transformation of religious painting in European art. And I'm strongly primarily, essentially European. We have another painting by Alphonse Mucha for the town hall of Prague, and he's showing the religious history and epic history of the Czechs. A great national hero emerges, the religious hero, national hero emerges, Jan Hus in the 19th century, a very popular subject in Czech art. And here is the Master Jan Hus preaching at the Bethlehem Chapel. His ideas about reforming Christianity. And of course, the Hussite movement lost to the Catholic movement. And Ernest Gellner has ironically said, would that this had happened in Ireland, the victory of the Catholics over the Protestants. Now, European religious art also experienced a fundamental transformation as artists turn to painting the everyday life of the religious life of the nation, not just the saints, Jesus and Virgin Mary and Paul preaching, but you see the daily religious life of the people taking center stage. So I'm showing you here this transformation. We have classical old masterly painting by Leoussi of Christ crucified, and this is transformed in the hands of Gauguin, showing the Breton women being very pious in their region, wearing regional dresses, which he celebrates, and in a very modern style, much more simplified. If you compare it with Velázquez, the flat colors, outlines, the simplification in illusion. So we see the avant-garde, and that's what this is the main point that I want to make. The avant-garde engages with religious art and national subjects. We have other interesting images and transformations in religious iconography and Christian iconography. This is a very revolutionary, unseen before representation of Jesus as a Jew. And Chagall shows this nationalization of Jesus, which became especially important, the martyrdom of Jesus in the hands, and during the Second World War, in the hands of Christian Germans. So you see, you are crucifying again Jesus, and he identifies himself with a Jewish Jew. We can see another image, which is so fascinating. These transformations in the representation of the crucifixion, I find very interesting. You see Mucha, again, Mucha is one of the great national artists that I like, so I show quite a lot of these things. So Mucha is now painting an image of the liberation of the Czechs from German rule. So you see here a very different, complete transformation of the standard event of the crucifixion. You don't see Jesus, you got a man who is crucified with a woman, bohemia, naked, wearing a drapery with very folk Czech designs, and she's liberated from the cross by France, which is what happened because the French supported the Czech National Council in exile in Paris in 1918, Masaryk especially. France, how can you tell France? How can you tell France? How can yes, the hat for the region. Very good. So when the freedom, he is wearing the freedom hat, getting a kiss. The kiss of liberation, not the kiss of treason. Now, another image of a canonical central subject in Christianity, you have the Annunciation. The Annunciation is the Virgin Mary is turned into a Czech peasant girl, wearing the folk dress. Now, these are fascinating transformations, how the national idea transforms so deeply patterns of artistic tradition. Then portraiture is transformed, also very radically. This is the old. You see a portrait of Louis XVI by Joseph Leoussi. Louis says trying to become liberal with a Frisian cap and drinking to the nation, Vive la Nation. And then Louis XVI without the head. So this is the end of this traditional portraiture, and you have the replacement of kings, portraits of kings and greats, by portraits of national heroes, national leaders, such as Émile Zola in France, or the statue of Adam Mickiewicz in Krakow, a great poet and writer in Polish. And Zola you will find in the national hero of the Republic, of course. And you have at the bottom of his statue, you have images of work, because he supported his work as a friend of the town, and the idea of the modern solidarity based on the division of labor, celebration of work, and on the other side is the concept of fertility, which is, I won't go into it, but it's become very important in the more or less eugenics movement, not eugenics in the bad sense, the attempt for the French to increase their population because they had just been defeated by the Germans, because the Germans had a huge army, and the explanation was that cherchez la femme, it's the women who were the problem why the French lost in the Franco-Prussian War in 1971. They're cocotte, and they must get out of the brothel and start having children in the house. And you see other portraits. You have portraits of the great literary men, mostly men, all men, portraits of Lev Tolstoy, and the portrait of Taras Shevchenko, a very important Ukrainian poet who also developed the Ukrainian language. The peasant poet, the son of the serf, who became a great man of letters and an artist, and who mildly criticized the zone. Now, there are transformations in genre painting, and these are very important. And this is where the change in the hierarchy comes in, of the subject. Now, traditionally, genre involved images of the daily life of the common people. And usually you will see oriental subjects, slave markets, harems, or just the picturesque things doing, the peasants doing new stuff. And now you have another new emphasis and the new approach, a new way of saying, as Peter Berger would say, of the peasants. So with a new focus on the national community, artists set out to discover, to define, record, and celebrate the distinctive customs, habits, and ways of life of the common people as members of the nation. So what happens in genre becomes the new history painting. So in the new history painting, painting everyday life, the nation emerges as a rural, moral community whose patterns of life are sacred, exemplary, and must be preserved. And this sacred, charismatic status of the peasant is expressed first in the proliferation of peasant subjects, and second, in informal ways, in the monumental size of the new peasant art that rivals the size of academic history painting. History painting is usually huge, but peasant painting becomes huge. The national re-evaluation of rural life would go counter to feudal and socialist attitudes to the peasant. Socialism realized the urban working class as the agent of the future and displaced the peasant. Karl Marx and Engels would refer to the idiocy of rural life. Contrary to this, the idea of the nation as an authentic cultural community turned the peasant into the symbol of human dignity and cultural authenticity, the carrier of religious piety and ancestral wisdom, and thus, as Weber observed, the repository of irreplaceable cultural values. And this also inspired artistic experimentation, a new subject, a new approach to idealization. So here I show you have the development of the Wagnerian idea, the Gesamtkunstwerk. Painters work with ballet dancers and musicians to create this total work of art, the modern art. And this is Nicolas Röhrich, the design for the South Coast du Canton by Stravinsky, which was shown across Europe, especially in Paris, with great success. And Röhrich's style is new, it's not old masterly illusionistic. The details play against the flat surfaces, bright colors, accompanied by this wonderful, if you like, by you, music of modern music of Stravinsky. Even the God turns to peasant subjects, although they're not peasant, French peasants, and they had an interesting switch to the interpretation of this pastel by the guy in the National Gallery last Sunday. The National Gallery changed the title from the original attributed Russian dancers. These are Ukrainian dancers. And the reason for the evidence is that these blue and yellow ribbons in the hair of the young girls. And this painting has been claimed by the Ukrainian artists for it to change the title. This is our dance, not Russian imperialism. It's not Russian dance. So Russia appropriated all the top cultures, although Ukraine had this problem, Ukraine and Russia and identity. Now, I'll show you here another example. I mean, this is a pattern. I'm talking about patterns. I'm not giving examples. Another good example is before Cézanne, another member of the avant-garde, engages with the national theme, the French national identity. France is a place where toutes les fleurs, toutes les couleurs. It's a multicultural, diverse place, and all the diverse culture should be preserved. And Cézanne takes part in the revival of Provence, of Provençal culture, and he sets out to maintain the custom of card playing, which the state was trying to suppress. It was gambling. He transforms the tradition of card playing into a more monumental, serious, dignified activity, and idealizes it. Now, landscape is another example of a smooth card painting. A Moravian girl, a member of the Moravian choir, whose songs were inspired by the songs of the local birds. Now, landscape painting also changes from this or traditional classic or idealized fictional landscapes, such as this by Nicolas Poussin, changes into national landscapes. So this is a classic image of romantic landscape in which Caspar David Friedrich shows, identifies the landscape with the people. The Germans are oak trees. They're rooted strongly in their land, and they want to defend the land. And this is during the just after the Napoleonic Wars against the invasion of the land by foreigners. The English also celebrate the landscape. They call it, William Horton Hunt calls this our English coast, not just coast with sheep, but our English coast. The Danes take part also in this revival and do focus on the national landscape rather than the classic or idealized landscape. And he shows this mound on the Danish coast, going back to the Vikings who would bury their boats in mounds. Juan Miro is another example, an extreme, even surrealists were engaged with the idea of the national landscape. Can you tell me, so that you wake you up a bit, where is the national reference in this landscape, if you see anything? The flags, very good. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So you see the flag, the French, the Spanish, and the Catalan, the French and the Catalan one side, and the Spanish on the other. Because 1923, painting 1923, when when Primo de Rivera starts bans the Catalan language and the Catalan flag. So you have this great avant-garde engaging with this, with the national force. And you see, even in still life, you have national engagement. You see Pablo Picasso painting still life, which he calls nature morte espagnole, because it's nature morte. Here it is, it's espagnole. And there is, I think, it is the Catalan flag there as well. Now, another thing that I want to talk to you about, which is very much part of all of this, is the integrative. Is to see Romanticism and the Enlightenment as integrative revolution. Tenets, right. So let's look at the integrative revolutions. Now, the modern idea of the nation was an idea about the mass of the people, not about aristocratic elites as it had been since the Middle Ages. Led by intellectuals, both Enlightenment and Romanticism were populist movements. They focused on and idealized the mass of the people. The Enlightenment sought the political freedom and emancipation of the people, recognizing in them the rationality and dignity of the universal humanity. Romanticism sought their cultural freedom and prestige, seeing in the people, especially the rural folk, makers and custodians of culture. Both the Enlightenment and Romanticism were integrated revolutions. They both transformed deeply the relations between center and periphery. The Enlightenment turned subject into citizens, so the political periphery entered the center of power as the new sovereign. With Romanticism, rural culture enters the city and changes urban culture, while at the same time changes itself. Romanticism, as Isaiah Berlin put it, was a desire for anarchy, the desire for recognition, the desire of the despised, humiliated cultural periphery to raise its band back, to become a high culture. The transformation of the culture of the periphery into a high culture, a culture of the center, would manifest itself politically and legally most clearly in the transformation of vernacular languages into official national languages, as in the case of Finnish, Hungarian, Demotic Greek, and Hebrew. The idea of the nation has had massive appeals, uniting social strata within and across borders. However, national integration had a cost, the cost of life. We find the link between nation and death clearly expressed in art. Artists would make clear in images drenched in blood and the pathos of death, the cost of upholding liberty and cultural identity as ultimate values, as things that is without which life is not worth living. And there is something superficial, I would say, and reductive in seeing, as Michael Billig and others have seen, in national consciousness and in the life of nations, the banality of evil, which is the concept that promotes in banal nationalism, which we took from Hannah Arendt. And I show you here this link. It is a very clear link that is made through architecture and art between death and freedom in this case. And you have in Athens, the Athens Parliament, Syntagma Square, Constitution Square, and you see at the bottom, on the base that is of the Parliament building, you have the tomb of the unknown soldier. And on this tomb there is an extract from Pericles' funeral oration, in which Pericles said this famous phrase that to be happy is to be free, and to be free is to be brave. And therefore, do not take lightly the perils of war, because it is very important that you should fight. So we have this linking here, which is very clear that freedom depends on self-sacrifice. It is worth dying for freedom, because that's what you will lose if you let tyranny or foreign invaders disappear. They can't come in. Then we have again in the famous painting by Delacroix, Liberty Guiding the People. You have this link between death. Liberty is guiding the people, and the price of liberty, fight for it, would be death. Guernica also shows this, the death that comes from defending the Basque culture against imperial nationalism. This is an example of a non-European example with this is the Indian monument to independence, and the same from from Gandhi. Now, I want to go, do I have 1 minute? 3 minutes. Good. Now, I want to go also with the scripture. I want to go to the connection between liberty and identity. That will be my last point. Now, the world of nations, as conceived in the revolutions of 1848 and 1918, and in Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, would be a world of democratic nations modeled on Republican France, the USA, and Great Britain. However, and as Geller put it, the course of true nationalism never did run smooth. Dictatorships and totalitarian forms of government would suppress and distort the impulse for both democracy and identity. And nowhere is the desire for both democracy and cultural identity rendered more visible than in the parliament buildings, which would emerge in the new cathedrals, which would emerge as the new cathedrals in the capitals of Europe, especially from 1848 onwards. These buildings, it would eventually how the representatives of the will of all the people will become the key sites for the dialogue between liberty and identity. The architecture and the artistic decoration will combine affirmations of both democracy and the cultural identity of the Danists. So you see in the parliament buildings that emerge as sites of democracy, you see at the same time affirmation of identity. The mother of parliament, the English House of Commons, the British House of Commons, was rebuilt between 1833 and 1835 after a big fire in a Gothic style to affirm the history of and religiosity, piety of the British people. And here in the Finnish parliament, in the plenary hall, you have an amphitheatrical arrangement of seats to echo the Greek amphitheater, where there was the free debate in the council in Agora, where decisions will be made, discussion will take place, and you have identity at the same time in these 5 figures, which embody 4 values of Finnish identity. Representing the settler, the keeper of the borders, faith, the harvester, and the future. Women. Have I said 5? And I want to finish. In conclusion, the organization that was formed in 1948 after the Second World War and called itself the United Nations set up liberty and identity, or reason and moral conscience, as natural birthrights of all human beings. And quote, declaration, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. We are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. In his critique of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, on whom the United Nations Declaration that I just read to you is based, Sir Isaiah Berlin has observed that to say with Rousseau that, I quote, man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains, which is in 1752, is tantamount to saying that all sheep are born carnivores, but everywhere they eat grass. However, even if it cannot prove empirically that human beings are born free, the world would be a wasteland, and life even more nasty, brutish, and short without this belief. And freedom and identity are both under attack today, in Ukraine and elsewhere. It is for the future to show if liberty and identity will be lost and the statues and paintings that proclaim them will be broken.
Thank you, Athena, for this very interesting, richly illustrated talk. I can imagine that there are many questions from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand and speak up so we can hear it here in front and at the back as well. So, questions, please. You?
Thanks very much for that, Athena. Most history of art is deeply predicated on the history of innovation.